Now, for more insights into oil and gas, let's bring in Kent Moores. He's the executive chairman of the Global Strategic Investment Institute. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much.
So first, I'm going to have you talk about Biden's announcement and how it coincides with the announcement from other countries on this.
Well, there was a coordination here that was pretty clearly orchestrated beginning at the recent Glasgow meetings. The 50 million barrels coming from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve will be added with volume from 5 other countries to result about 70 million barrels or so. Now, to put this in perspective, number one, even though the announcement has come out, the additional 50 million barrels from the United States won't actually be coming into the market for another 2 weeks or so. And secondly, when you put all of this together in an aggregate, what it is these nations are moving into the market is only about half of 1 day's global supply. So from a strategic, symbolic standpoint, this is significant,
Right.
but it's not likely to be moving any needles in the market.
So I want to take a look at this White House statement that came out this evening. President Biden talking about cooperating with other countries, about demand outpacing supply, and that gap between wholesale and retail gas prices leading to these profits that are being pocketed by the companies rather than passing the savings on to consumers. But as you mentioned then, how important is this announcement for gas prices, both short-term and long-term?
We're likely to see gas prices decline initially, but they're not going to stay there. There's one basic overall important point that people have to remember about this. The prices are essentially determined not by what you pay at the pump, but by what is commanded in future contracts, the so-called paper barrels of both oil and also processed product. Now there, the traders have already figured in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve releases. And so if the releases do not continue after the initial rave, the contracts will simply revert. This is not a long-term solution to anything. And even with 50 million barrels coming in over the next several weeks, we're likely to see gasoline prices rising again in the United States by the end of the year.
And we've certainly already seen that oil prices actually hit a 1-week high after President Biden's announcement. So then, in terms of how President Biden and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson are going to square this politically, how do you see them handling that both in the short term and longer term?
In the short term, I think they're going to reap some benefit, and there will be spin doctors on both sides of the Atlantic playing this up considerably to political advantage, but there is no there. In other words, without additional movements, injections of more barrels out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, this cannot be sustained. Without major shifts in the market, the price will be going back up.
And obviously they have a big climate agenda, both the UK, the US, and of course China as well. China also part of this move. Talk about their significance in this announcement and how this might impact China's own energy issues.
Well, China's energy issues have been evolving for some time. There is already on the books a major national initiative into green energy already afoot in China. So the SPR release, how much is coming from China, by the way, we don't know at the moment. We're dealing with about 20 million additional barrels from sources other than the United States. So this, for each of these countries, is also somewhat symbolic. But it's important to remember that moves out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve are of no great consequence in an overall national energy policy unless they're coordinated longer term with other impacts. And so what we see here is the necessity, something I've been arguing now for quite some time, of a coordinated impact in energy demand needs that bring about the essential sources of traditional energy with the sources or the renewable sources that are now coming on board. That's the truly exciting prospect that we may actually see opening up at the beginning of the first quarter of 2022.
So then, given that potential prospect, if that does happen, plus these announcements that we're seeing from other countries, what do you expect in terms of OPEC and OPEC Plus's response?
Oh, this is going to be interesting. OPEC Plus may reconsider its next move when it meets again. Noticeably, the Russians have been very silent on this. They're the principal X, they're the principal plus, rather, in the OPEC plus equation. The addition of volume from other countries' reserves into the international market is not the sort of approach that the Russians would like to see. Now, OPEC can withstand this, but recall that OPEC already has some difficulties inside its own membership. The recent movement by the United Arab Emirates to require or demand an additional allowance of supply into the market is the first wave in what is less than a unanimous OPEC approach moving forward. That's going to be further made difficult by these petroleum reserve releases. Even though the releases are not of great impact long term, symbolically, they bring to measure what it is that OPEC Plus has been trying to do, and we may see some additional difficulties inside the organization surfacing as a result of the petroleum reserve releases.